fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Got Mr. Joe Goldberg co-hosting today.
I'm in the house.
You're
in your house. Just looking around. I'm calling from the basement.
Well, that's good. It's a good place to be, actually. You know.
Okay, good. That's where you keep the wine. I'm fine.
Yeah, all the wine cooler, the pool table, everything's down there. You know, entertainment center. Boy,
that's where Richard hides the bodies. Right?
Yeah, well, yeah, but we can't talk about that. That's
ask him.
Yeah, well, we'll give it away. Well, anyway, we've got a great writer. He's got a lot of books out, and I found him online, of course. People know that I do a little bit of carousing once in a while online, even though it's a dangerous place to be these days. And I found him. He's got a lot of books. Looks really interesting. So let's welcome to the show Richard Helms. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you having me by today.
Yeah, it's great. Listen, so you've got, like I said, there's quite a few books. I see like 16, 90, I don't know how many. How did you get yourself into writing like this? Like, where did it come from for you?
I've been writing all my life. My first short story was published when I was 8 years old in a school paper, and I've been writing. I wrote plays for a number of years. I was in theater through most of the 1970s until I went to college. I started college late compared to most people, and I was an actor and a singer-dancer for a number of years, and I wrote a number of plays that were produced in the Charlotte, North Carolina area and the Greensboro area in North Carolina. But I didn't get into writing novels or short stories really until much later. It was probably the mid-1980s before I really got into it. I didn't get published until 1999, so I was writing for about 15 years, more or less just to grow my chops, to figure out what I was doing. But I had my first novel published in 1999 through Mystery Writers of America's collaboration with iUniverse, the Mystery and Suspense Press, and they did 2 books there, and I was pretty much on my way.
Wow. And so what kind of writer do you consider yourself? It looks kind of like historical and mystery and all that. Is that kind of where you sit for genre?
Yeah, people ask me what I write, and I say, well, I write histories and mysteries, and sometimes I combine the two. My novel, The Mojito Coast, was based in Havana during the Cuban Revolution in 1958, but it was a private eye story primarily. My novel, Vicar Breckenridge, was built around the 1843 trial of Daniel Monaghan in London for murdering Prime Minister Robert Peel's private secretary. In that book, I fictionalized it using a thief taker from the time, which was basically a private detective slash bounty hunter type of character in the 1840s. And so those two were mixes of mystery and history, but sometimes I just write a historical novel by itself. A Kind of Savage Place was a historical novel about from the 1950s to 1980s in a small town in North Carolina. And I'm writing one right now I just published one called 22 Rue Montparnasse back in November, which is about the lost generation in Paris in the 1920s. And then I'm working on one now called Hoopy River Bottomland, which is based on the music of Larry John Wilson, a country composer from Nashville. He's actually from Swainsboro, Georgia originally, but he lived in Nashville for a number of years. And I'm writing basically a book set in the late or the 60s and 70s, built around Laurel Canyon in Los Angeles, called Hoopy River Bottomland. So those are historical novels. And I also write straight mysteries, primarily private eye novels, but sometimes police procedurals. Yeah, 25 books out now. I think, 22 Rue Montparnasse was 25th novel out, and I'm working on number 28 right now.
Jeez, Richard, I think you missed Harlequin romances there as a genre in your list of books.
They rejected me.
Well, I can understand. Because you sort of answered my questions you're going on, but why? Because I have historical fiction on my list of books I want to get to. Why mysteries, and the historical fiction part of it? And then I ask the question of, how do you do it? And why do you pick those times?
I'm kind of a history nut. I was a psychologist in my career. I was a clinical forensic psychologist and later a college professor. But I always felt like I might have been a temporarily misplaced historian or misassigned historian. I've always been kind of a history nut. I love history. I love reading historical novels. I love reading historical fact-based books and do a ton of research on historical novels, so I learn a lot about it there. So basically, I just write what I enjoy writing. And the periods I write in, my favorite periods are the 19th and 20th centuries. So I write the stories in those times. Yeah. Just kind of write what you know, write what you enjoy.
So you were around in the 19th century. That's impressive.
You know, my grandfather was. He told me a lot of stories.
There you go.
Yeah, it gives it all away. Well, what made you write the Lewis book, the 22 Rue Montparnasse? What drew you to that?
I'll be honest with you. I got the idea when I was watching Woody Allen's movie Midnight in Paris. I knew I wanted to write an historical novel based in Paris. My wife and I have been there and love Paris. It's just a beautiful, beautiful place. It is, as one of my characters says in the book, there's no place like Paris. So I wanted to write something based there, and I wanted to make it historical. And when I saw Midnight in Paris, I said, I think this is the hook I'm looking for. I think I'm looking for something about the lost generation. And just started doing research, and the story evolved in my head over the course of, about a year. It took about a year before I started sitting down to write it. And when I did, it came out in about 4 months, 4.5 months. I did a master class with Edward Albee back in the 1970s, almost 50 years ago. And he gave a piece of advice during the master class that said, never put a word on paper before it can write itself. And that pretty much is my style. I let the thing cook in my head until I feel like I'm ready to type it. And when I sit down, by the time I sit down at the keyboard, it pretty much comes out like dictation. It types quickly, but it takes a long time to cook before it gets there.
Well, listen, the main characters there, Beau and Keeby, right? I guess in the newest book. How do you relate with your characters, and how do you write them? So do they kind of talk to you? Do you see them? Do you picture them? What's your relationship like when you write these characters?
I mentioned that I was a psychologist for many, many years. And one of the things that we do is we assess personalities. In fact, one of my primary jobs for many years was doing assessments and psychological evaluations for the courts. And I spent a lot of time basically trying to figure out what people's personalities were. And I do pretty much the same thing. There are types. There are profiles of individuals. There's something called trait theory in psychology, where you break down a person's personality into individual, discrete traits. Like, think about the Boy Scout law. Boy Scout is brave, clean, reverent, trustworthy, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all traits. And what I do when I write these characters is I say, well, okay, this person is going to be, say there's a trait test called the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, or MMPI. This person is going to be a 2-5 on the MMPI. And that doesn't mean much to other people. But for me, that gives me an entire personality profile that says these are the things that this individual is likely to do in given circumstances, and this is going to be their personality. So I create that individual, I give them a personality, and then I set them loose. I'm a pantser. Even with the book I'm writing right now, Hopi River Bottomland, is the very first one I've written in probably 20 years. That I'm working from an outline, because I'm a pantser. I basically start the book with two people in a situation, one of which has a problem and one of whom may have a solution for that problem, and I go from there. I create it all out of whole cloth from my head as I write, and I let my characters tell me what they want to do and how they want to behave. Which sounds terribly psychotic, but it really does work for me. It doesn't work for some people, it works for me. While I do engage in a great deal of what I call Bill and Ted's excellent book writing, where I write myself into a corner and say, I've got to go back 15 chapters and set it up so I can get out of this corner. That's kind of the plight of the pantser. But it works for me. So, yeah.
I just was talking to Al about that before we came on, because he's running his thing, I'm running mine. You write something, great idea, and I got to go back and get the off-ramps to this idea somewhere down the road. Yep.
Now I got to. What was the scene in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure where they're looking for the car keys, and Bill says, why don't I steal them from my dad and put them behind this sign here? And they look behind the sign and they say, oh, it looks like we're going to do that. So, the keys are back there. Say, okay, we got to remember to come back here and put them here later. Kind of like what happens when you're a pantser is you write yourself into a corner and have to go back and save yourself from your own mistakes. Back earlier in the book.
And so you write. So that's like you boil quite a while and then you write it.
Yes.
And so when you do, how many edits do you need to go through, or is it pretty sound when you do it like that?
I generally do 6 or 7 edits over the course of a rewrite period. The first one is the huge chop. I call it the huge chop. There's a woman out there named Diana Urban who has published a list of 43 words to cut from your book. And the first pass on editing is always, I go in and I just block delete all of those 43 words. And there are things like, that, just, up, down, in, out, that kind of thing. Anything that involves a preposition. But you go through and you cut everything. I go through and cut everything. And then I read through the book, and wherever the sentence doesn't make sense without the word I cut, I put it back in. That usually winds up cutting out about 4,000 or 5,000 words out of the manuscript right there. And the rest of it is rewriting for flow and continuity and style and getting the words right, basically. So I'll go through 6 or 7 rewrites before it's ready to be published. For a short story, 1 or 2. Generally, I edit those as I write, and so I usually only need 1 or 2 rewrites for a short story.
And having your background, I'd imagine that the character must be the key. You say you start, let's say, with the 2 characters and put them in situations. So really, the characters come first, and then the story. Yes, absolutely. Sometimes the title comes first. I'm writing a story right now for an anthology that commissioned it. And my wife and I were talking about something the other night. I'd gotten her some flowers for her birthday. And the flowers, after about a week, were beginning to get kind of droopy. And we were talking about sad flowers. And I said, sad flowers, that would be a wonderful story title. Matter of fact, I'm writing a story right now I don't have a title for. I'm just going to pop it in there. And but I'll come up with a title or character that's very interesting to me. The character of Vicar Breckenridge came to me long before the book did. I just didn't have a place to put him. I was reading about Victorian London and about thief takers, who a lot of them were ex-Bow Street runners. When Robert Peel formed the London Police Department, that followed the London Police Department, the Bobbies. A lot of the individuals who had been Bow Street runners previously did not become police officers, and instead they became what's called thief takers, freelance skip tracers and bounty hunters and private detectives. Some of them a lot less scrupulous than others. And I thought, what a great idea for a character. I hadn't seen any books featuring thief takers, so I said I'd like to do something with this guy. And gave the name Vicar Breckenridge, gave him background and back history, but I didn't have a story for him to go into until I was reading The Thief of Time in a sushi restaurant in Matthews, North Carolina, about 10 years ago. And I said, I want to write another historical novel. And I had just been lecturing that day in my forensic psychology course about the Daniel Monotton trial in London in 1843, and the two things just kind of fell together. And I said, this is the story I've been looking for my character, Vicar Breckenridge, and wrote the book about a year later.
Ideas come from everywhere. I did the same thing for the book I'm writing right now. I teach social media. I'm like, I've been showing the same TED Talk for years. Like, this is a book. Why aren't I turning this into a fiction book? But you mentioned locations a lot. So I'm wondering, how do you approach setting as a character in all your books?
For a long time, I wrote books set in exotic locations. My Pat Gallagher series is set in New Orleans. My Eamon Gold series is set in San Francisco. And I wrote a lot about a lot of exotic places about 10 years ago, maybe a little longer. I started thinking in terms of, I haven't been to San Francisco in 5 or 6 years, so I don't know what's going on there anymore. I don't enjoy going to New Orleans anymore, so I'm not going down there anymore, and I don't know what's happening there. So maybe I should write more about places that I do know. And for the last 10 years, most of my books have been set, at least partly, somewhere in the Carolinas. And my short stories also. I have an entire, kind of like Faulkner's Yoctopathpa County. I've got a county called Bliss County in North Carolina, where I've set some 5 different story series. The Judd Wheeler series is set in a small town called Prosperity in Bliss County. My Bowie Crafter short story series is set in Morgan. I've got a bunch of short stories. One was published in Ellery Queen, Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, a couple of months ago, called The 4-9 Profile. Involves a forensic psychologist in Bliss County. So I've developed this entire fictitious county that looks remarkably like Union County in North Carolina, where I lived for 23 years. And Prosperity looks very much like Weddington, the town where I lived for 23 years. So I take places that I'm very familiar with, and I essentially turn them into new places with different names and sometimes different qualities. Like Morgan, the county seat of Bliss County, is based on Monroe, North Carolina, which is kind of a suburb of Charlotte, where we've lived for the last 8-9 years. Morgan is not a terribly cosmopolitan place, but in order to write the stories that I want to set there, I have endowed it with things like a huge civic center and a convention center and a huge hotel and movie studio. Because each story has to take place in a different setting, and I have a zoo and places like that. So I take places that I know and I embellish them, basically, and the places that I haven't written many stories in places that I don't know at all. I just finished a book in October that's coming out later this year. It features a North Carolina State Bureau of Investigations agent who is investigating the murder of a trivia question Super Bowl winning quarterback in a small town in North Carolina called Choctaw. And basically, I based Choctaw on Burnsville, North Carolina, just because I've been there and enjoyed visiting it a lot up in the mountains. So I'll take places that I know and embellish them. Might change the names, give them qualities they don't have, give them facilities they don't have. The reason I started writing the Judd Wheeler series set in Prosperity in the first place was because when I lived in Weddington, North Carolina, we didn't have a police force. We had no police force at all. We used the sheriff's department for law enforcement in our town. And I wanted to write a story originally about how a small town forms the police force. And skipped all that and went directly to 8 years later when I set the first Judd Wheeler book, which was 6 Mile Creek. Came out in 2010 from 5 Stars. And it just went ahead and just skipped ahead entirely 8 years and skipped the whole backstory. And did that series in the town where I lived.
Do the people who know you and know the area go, hey, there's no civic center there. That's not real. Yes,
some of them did. I've had people write me and say, are you writing about Marvin or Waxhaw or Weddington? I'd say, yes, they're all in there. These are all small towns outside of Charlotte.
Well, so these characters, like the one that you mentioned, that you've had for a long time, and then finally you find a situation, put the character into it, and you write a story. That's great. But so what happens to these characters when the story's done and it's over? Do you still hear them or see them? Are they still around, or they just disappear?
Great question, because the story I'm writing for the anthology right now, I had a book come out from 5 Star in 2013 called The Mojito Coast. It was about, and I mentioned it earlier. It was about the Cuban Revolution in 1958. And it featured a Miami private detective named Cormac Loam. Well, that was 11 years ago. 12 years ago the book came out, and I haven't written any more Cormac Loam stories since then. But when the story I'm writing is for Michael Bracken, who's editing this anthology. And when I was talking with Michael about what kind of stories he wanted, the book is about stories in set in the 1990s. It came to me that I haven't resolved the story. The book ended on kind of a cliffhanger with a character that disappeared, because I was intending to write another Cormac Loam book but never got around to it. So the story I'm writing actually so it actually finishes the story of Cormac Loam and his lover Marisol from Cuba, who disappears at the end of the book and stays disappeared for about 30 years until she shows up in the story. So sometimes I have an opportunity to give them a little bit of closure down the line. Sometimes I don't.
You mind if I ask you about short story writing?
Sure.
Because you write a lot of stuff. I'm looking at those two. How do you do them? Why? What's the difference between writing a book and writing that short story? You told about the editing process, but what in your mind? How do you construct it and get all that into a smaller number of words?
It's really interesting. I actually posted about this on Facebook the other day. I said writing a novel is like building a house. Writing a short story is like building a birdhouse, but a really nice birdhouse. The idea is that with a short story, everything has to be compact. You don't have the luxury of backstory. You don't have the luxury to develop characters. So you have to use shorthand. You have to use descriptors that tell a lot about the individual very quickly, so you can get on with the actual plot. I think I spend about 2 paragraphs, maybe 3, in the short story I'm writing, Sad Flowers, getting the reader caught up with everything that took place in the book, and then after that, it's all about getting on with the plot and allowing the characters themselves to be understood by the reader through their actions and what they say, rather than be telling people about that. I write short stories in very much a Hemingway-esque style, very direct, very abrupt, and very staccato. A lot of 1 and 2 line paragraphs in my short stories. They're almost like shorthand for novels. And sometimes, and a lot of my short stories can run to 9 or 10,000 words just because they are like mini novels but I just don't have the luxury to expand on a lot of the things that I would like to in a novel itself.
So when you're writing a novel, how long does it take you to go through one of these novels? It seems like without the boil time, so you have the thought process time, and then when you sit down and actually write, how long does it take you to get that down?
It grows about 10,000 words a week. So if I'm doing a 100,000 word novel, it'll take about 10 weeks. I generally count on doing about 10,000 words a week as my benchmark. Novel length comes in at right about 65,000 words. And so after about 6 or 7 weeks, I've got the length down. Now it's just a matter of finishing telling the story, however much that takes. Everybody is idiosyncratic when it comes to their writing, their work process, and I'm kind of in a weird, different situation in that I have a mental condition called cyclothymia, which is kind of like, I think bipolar disorder light, where I alternate on 3 and 4 month periods between hypomania, which is kind of like just being really, really jazzed all the time, and dysthymia, which is kind of like ennui on steroids. Okay, it's not depression, it's not mania on either end, but when I'm hypomanic, I can't read because I can't pay attention to what I'm reading. My mind is running ahead and thinking about stuff I want to write. And when I'm dysthymic, I can't write. And that's when I read and watch movies and recharge and all that. Robert Schumann, the composer, had a much more terrible case of bipolar disorder in the 19th century. And you can actually track his work output, or you can track his manic and depressed moods by his work output. You can actually look on a timeline of when he was producing a lot of pieces, a lot of compositions, and that was when he was manic. And when he was depressed, there's like months and even years when he's not writing anything. And I'm kind of the same way. When I'm dysthymic, I can't write, so I read, I recharge, I think, I develop, I build the stories in my head, I build the characters in my head, I steal a lot of stuff from stuff I'm reading and watching in movies, plot lines, and or sometimes I'll watch a TV show and I'll see a plot that I think is going to go in one direction and it goes in a different direction. I think my idea was better and I'm going to use that in the story. And then when I fade over into the hypomanic phase, after about 3 months usually of dysthymia, I can count on about 3.5 to 4 months being jazzed and energetic and ready to go. And that's when I write the books. And I generally will knock out a book and two or three short stories during each hypomanic episode. I probably have the weirdest work process of any writer in America because I can only write for about maybe 5-6 months a year, actual typing. But that 4 or 5 months in a year, or 4 months or 5 months when I'm over the course of a year when I'm below the line, I'm also writing. I'm just not typing out the words.
That's you have a weapon at your disposal, perhaps, and maybe not a weapon. I want to just say for the record, though, for those who are listening to yourself, I have the word "just" 148 times in my current work. So.
Oh, I'm terrible for just. I had
almost is my biggest word. I use almost as my number one enemy word.
When I was at 5-Star, I did 5 novels with 5-Star before they closed down. And I would be there still if they were still up because they were wonderful, wonderful people to work with. But I was very lucky to work with Denny Dietz as my editor. Denise Dietz went by Denny. She I used to refer to as the world's greatest editor because she really was terrific, and not only because she did a great job with the books, but she was very invested in teaching her writers to be better writers in the first place. And, she'd send me a manuscript back with lots of red in the margins and things like, I'd write something like, I laid down, on the bed. Okay. And she would strike out on the bed and write, where else would you lay down, stupid? Says, you're a better writer than this. Don't make these mistakes.
Yeah. I sat down, really. Yeah.
Having somebody like that to teach you, made me a much, much, much better writer, I think. And unfortunately, Denny passed away last year, but she was really instrumental in making me a much better writer and much better at avoiding words like just and almost and all that in the first place. And I found that whereas in a book I wrote 10 years ago, I think in the first version of A Kind and Savage Place ran to 750 pages. So it was a long, long, long book. And I think the word just appeared in it 4,260 times or something like that.
You win. Ding, you win. Here's a prize.
There's a huge number of justs in there. And I just deleted all of them and only put like 100 back in when it was all said and done. Yeah, just is a bad one. That is another one, especially when you say, I told him that I was going to,
I have a list of them on the wall here. Sure, almost, just, certainly.
Google Diane Urban, 43 words to cut from your
I already did. You're late to the party here, Richard. Sorry, I was paying attention to you at the same time I was Googling. So.
Yeah, he's a busy guy there. He's working, while we're interviewing.
I'm learning.
Yeah, he's going to be a star here. Well, listen. Mr. Helms, so do you like to interact with readers? Do you like fans? Do you like all that sort of stuff? Do you have social media, website? Where do people find Richard?
I have a website, www.richardhelms.net, and I'm on Facebook. That's the social media that I'm on. And in all honesty, I don't interact. I don't personally. I have not made a personal author appearance except for one in New York to accept an award last May. I haven't made a personal author appearance since 2019. I'm still in the wrong century. 2019, and probably won't for the foreseeable future. Because of being me, I decided several years ago, actually during the pandemic, I decided that I recognized and realized that my book sales, even though I hadn't made a personal appearance in 2 years anywhere, book signing, reading, anything, I realized that my book sales hadn't changed a bit. Began thinking about what I wanted to get out of writing and why I was in it in the first place. And I recognized that there is a need to do publicity and promotions for writing, especially with novels. In the current situation we're in right now, I just don't feel like doing it. I'm just not interested in doing it. I write to write. I don't write to promote. I don't write to sell. I'm not a salesman. I'm not a natural salesman. I have in addition to cyclothymic. I have Asperger's syndrome, which makes me naturally reticent to be around people. I'm always very uncomfortable in crowds, uncomfortable at conventions. And I finally decided, well, that's the part of the whole writing business that I don't enjoy doing it. I don't enjoy doing presentations. I don't enjoy appearing in public. I don't enjoy pressing the flesh. So I'm just not going to do it anymore. I decided to do all my promotions online. And I've been using some book release people to help out. I do a lot of blog sites. I do a lot of online reviews. I do a lot of interviews like this. I do not leave the house to promote books anymore. It's just not something I want to do anymore. I would rather be sitting here writing than sitting in a bookstore somewhere signing books that people aren't buying. So for me, the writing is what comes first. I don't do this for an ego trip. I don't do this to make myself feel important. I do this because I have to write. I can't not write when I'm hypomanic. So, I have to be doing this. So I've been told by people that this is, destructive to, career self-destructive to your career. I don't have a writing career. I have a competitive writing career. So I realized about 10 years ago that I was never ever going to make the New York Times bestseller list. I realized an agent made it clear to me about 10 years ago that at my age, I was in my mid-60s by that point, the odds of breaking through with one of the big 4.5 New York publishers was practically non-existent. And so I said, well, heck with it. I'm going to do something else with this. I'm going to turn this into a competitive sport. And my goal each year is to get at least one nomination for something I've written. And in order to do that, I have to focus on the writing. So I let the awards and the award nominations do my PR for me. And I basically treat writing as a competitive sport. I write the very best thing I can write. I put it out there. And I've been nominated or won something every year since 2008 or since 2018. So, I'm not cool and something else will happen this year. But, that's where I'm getting my fulfillment from the writing. It's from from that aspect of it rather than from public attention. And I never understood book signings anyway. Unless you are a really big name, it's frustrating for the writer and most people don't know who you are and they'll just walk by and ignore you anyway. It always seemed to me to be more of an ego boost to the writer than it was a way of actually selling books. I know I interviewed Conrath at Killer Nashville several years ago, Joe Conrath, and he did his famous 500 bookstore tour about 15, 20 years ago, where he went to 500 bookstores and signed in like 6 months. He was doing like 5 or 6 a day and taking donuts to every one of them and he had a good point, which was that he was engendering goodwill with the booksellers who hand sell the books in the big brick and mortars. The problem is that booksellers don't hand sell books in the brick and mortars anymore. So engendering goodwill with the bookseller, half the booksellers in the brick and mortars don't read the books that I'm writing. They don't know what I write. They don't know about the awards that I'm getting. They don't know about this stuff. So engendering goodwill with them is great, and I'm happy to do that, but I'm not sure it's helping anybody's career anymore. The industry is so much different now than it was when Conrath did his 500 store tour that now so much of book promotion is done online that I don't really see the need to leave the house and put myself out in public and be uncomfortable for 2 or 3 hours when I could be at home writing.
But we'll have your website and book up anyway.
Thank you.
And we appreciate you coming on the show. So, writer Richard Helms, thank you.
Thank you.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.